Hello there and welcome to this game review. In this one we'll talk a bit about blunder checks, especially in the endgame, but until then there were some positional mistakes which should be talked about. So the opening went very well, d5 was played after developing pieces, and white's pieces are weirdly placed, so this definitely works out, so very good by black. Takes, knight f3, bishop g4, so developing the bishop as well. Maybe the bishop doesn't really do much there. For example, here after h3, the bishop just went back, because taking here wouldn't really make much sense. Now white would have a very strong bishop on this diagonal, and our bishop was very good, so we shouldn't just give it up. So bishop f5 is a good idea. Now bishop c4, knight b6, moving out of the way. And here, rook c8, this is a nice move, developing a rook. After bishop g5, now black has a question of what to do. And black decided to take on d1 quite quickly, but this is a mistake because it gives up the d file, as the queen was well placed here, and it could move to c7, which is a nice square for the queen in the Sicilian. Next, black can kick away this bishop and play rook to d8, taking the queen on d1, which is on the d file as well. Also, black could already attack this bishop, which would have to take the knight, and when we take back with the queen, our pawn structure will be good, and we will have the bishop there. For example, after rook e1, we can even play f6. This bishop wasn't doing anything anyway, and now we can solidify the center. The bishop will have to move away. And now let's see, rook d8 is a nice move, a6 is a nice move next, and black has good development. This bishop can come out like this. But after queen d1, now white is okay. h6, bishop e3. And now we would like to play something like rook fd8, but now we're a bit late because we had to use a whole move. After knight c5, the b7 pawn is a slight weakness. This is of course still fine for black, but a bit annoying. But knight b8 was played, and such moves generally shouldn't really not be played ever. Of course, these knights are not very well placed, so they should be improved, but going backwards shouldn't be the thing that we want to do, unless we have some kind of aim. So for example, black can now play something like bishop e6. This does go backwards, but with the idea to go forward. And the idea is either to play bishop c4 or knight c4, in either case using the square in the enemy territory. This would be nice. And also if knight c5, we could take the pawn, but also we can just play bishop c4, which would be quite strong. For example, if this happens, white probably cannot really take this pawn. We can just take this one, and now he has a worse pawn structure. So that's one example. But okay, knight b8 is a slight positional concession, and now white is better after knight a5. He is attacking this pawn. We can still defend it. Bishop e4, knight h2, but now knight c6 happens, and here knight c6 blunders away this pawn, which we were trying to defend. Black should probably just kick away the pieces. a6 is a possibility. It leaves this knight undefended, but we could take the bishop, and now we would have the bishop there, and slowly but surely we can get our pieces back into the game. And with this knight on h2, black is doing quite well. So instead, knight c6, and now this pawn is hanging. So again, before making any move, we must think about the opponent's checks, captures, and attacks. And here, the b7 pawn is no longer defended after we blocked our bishop. So this is unfortunate, but it's still kind of okay. But here, black decides to play a bit strangely. He decides to start trading pieces. But this is a bad idea. When we have less material, we should be trying to not trade pieces, as we already know. We've spoken about this a lot. But black decides to play bishop a4, trading the bishops. And the more pieces come off the board, the better white's pawn will be. But this knight on a4 is actually quite well placed here, because it is attacking b2, and something has to defend b2, so white will have to stay passive, and he cannot play b3 because c3 is hanging, which means white will slowly have to prepare c4 and then b3. But if he plays c4, then this square on d4 will be weak. So this knight on a4 is quite strong, which is why white should probably exchange it with knight c5. Okay, knight d6, the rook moves, and here white plays knight c4, black tries to exchange rooks again. I guess this one makes sense because we're trying to fight for the d file. Here the rooks are exchanged, and f5 is the correct idea because black has more pawns on the king side, so we should try to advance them as soon as possible. Rook d6 is played, now the knight moves, and bishop takes a7, so this is quite annoying as now we have 2 pawns less, but here white blunders his most important pawn. On b2, rook a6, we take it, and now after bishop c5 and moving the knight, in this position we are down a pawn, but our pieces are quite active, and these pawns are quite weak, so we should be fine, especially since this knight is still on h2. So knight c3, rook takes here, the knight goes back to a4. Probably we should just take here, and the material is now equal. We have more pawn islands, but that is okay. Our king can go to h7 or f7, and we have some ideas to attack f2 later on. Okay, this happens, and now f4. And f4 tries to do this kind of tactic where we win the f2 pawn for this one, but before making our kind of idea to play, we should try to figure out if our idea works tactically. Here it turns out we cannot actually recapture, because as mentioned, bishop d4, and this would be quite annoying, but this is not the worst thing that can happen, because now we can play rook b7. Still white is winning, because this will be a knight endgame, and he has this strong passed pawn on the a file. But even better would be rook takes g7, with the point to give a fork here. Here white would win a piece. So this was missed, and of course when we play f4 we think that if he takes I will take, right? So kind of a pre-move, but we should never pre-move in our games. We should think about checks, captures, and attacks on every single move. And here, if you did a blunder check, you would find that we actually cannot recapture, as this pin can be used by the opponent tactically. So he doesn't find it either, he just captures automatically. Now you took on f2, and this allows the same tactic, rook g7. Said we should move the king away, and now if this, then we give a check. So instead, knight f2, bishop h6, another blunder, and now all the pawns are getting off the board, some pieces are exchanged. White is still better because he has this pawn, but black should be able to defend, and he should be able to defend by bringing the king towards the game. This quite bad that the king is cut off on the first rank, but that is okay. Rook a2, a5. Probably black's best idea would be to give up the knight for this pawn and then try to defend with a rook against a rook and bishop, which should be possible, but it might be difficult. So when the knight goes here, knight b3, and here black should probably just take on a5. White will recapture, and here this is a draw, but it will be quite difficult to make the draw, though the white king is still cut off. White will need a lot of moves to start giving checkmate. But okay, rook a1, and the knight goes to c1, but now the knight is badly placed. It should have just taken the pawn, because that way we will get a theoretical draw, and now this pawn will become quite strong. The king also gets to improve, and the white is almost winning here if he plays king d5. The knight is quite far away, the pawn can go further, and the knight might not be in time to take it. But after this, the black king can go up, and after this, and importantly, there is knight c3, with the idea that now wherever the king goes, he will be checked. For example, if here, then here, taking the bishop. If here, then here, taking the pawn to make a draw. And anywhere here, we can give a discover check. So this is quite important, and the king controls these squares. But knight c3 is also working, and knight b5, stopping a7. So now, as we can see, black's best idea is again to take this pawn. Okay, this happens, rook c3. This is a good move to cut off the king, and this was at this point the only good move. So well played. Rook h8, then rook goes back, and a few moves later, surprisingly, well, black just wins the pawn on a6, and here white should of course go rook a7. He can win this knight, and tried to play for a win, but after a7, then rook is just hanging, and now suddenly black is winning. And he can win by going to pick up this pawn with knight b6 and take it with the rook. So quite lucky win by black, but it was decent defense after going down a few pawns after the opening. So hopefully this was useful, and hopefully you do more blunder checks so that even on these kind of obvious recaptures, we still think about more than one candidate move for the opponent, and we see the checks in the position. So good luck next time.